Rain falls over a grim alleyway where a group of men are brutally assaulting a victim. From the shadows, a lone figure observes the violence with a detached, almost weary expression, noting the unnecessary effort they're putting into the beating. He steps into the light, a casual greeting on his lips that catches the thugs off guard. With a smirk, he asks if they're the ones peddling the substance known as liberation, prompting a confused and hostile reaction from the bald leader. The stranger maintains his composure, claiming to be nothing more than a simple fortune teller. He offers a grim prophecy. If they don't drop what they're carrying and head home immediately, their luck is about to run out. In response to the warning, the bald thug lashes out with a heavy fist, striking the man squarely in the jaw. As he reels from the blow, the criminals erupt in mocking laughter, deriding his apparent weakness. He collapses to the wet pavement, the thugs looming over him to demand how he track them down. They make it clear they aren't mere users of liberation, but something more dangerous. Yet the fallen man only sighs, lamenting that his sincere advice was so easily discarded. Suddenly, a strange, ornate circular seal begins to glow with an intense, ethereal light. The word illumination echoes through the air as the hidden power within the stranger begins to manifest. Before the thugs can even blink, he is on his feet, his movements a blur of lethal precision. He seizes the bald man's face in a crushing grip, his voice dropping to a cold, menacing tone as he reminds them of his earlier warning. With a sickening thud, he slams the thug's head into the stone wall, the impact spraying blood across the alley. He stands over his broken opponent, confirming that this will indeed be the worst day of their lives. He watches as the remaining thugs recoil in sheer terror, their faces contorted with fear as they scramble away from the overwhelming power he just displayed. With a casual wave and a mocking farewell, he turns his back on the cowering men, pocketing a small pouch as he disappears into the downpour, leaving the alleyway behind. Moments later, the stranger reaches a quiet residence, his clothes clinging to his frame. He mutters to himself about being completely drenched as he approaches the entrance. The door swings open to reveal a woman with long, flowing hair, her expression a mix of worry and sternness as she demands to know where he has been. She addresses him as Matthew, her eyes searching his face for answers. He offers a sheepish apology, claiming he only went out to gather some ingredients and hadn't anticipated such a heavy downpour. As he speaks, the memory of the broken bodies he left in the alley flickers through his mind, a stark contrast to his mundane excuse. Noticing her lingering concern, he gently reaches out toward her, his voice softening as he asks if she is hungry, attempting to shift the focus away from his mysterious absence. She follows him inside as he promises to prepare a meal immediately, their silhouettes framed by the warm light of the doorway as the heavy rain continues to fall outside. High above the rooftop, the moon hangs partially obscured by clouds. In the quiet of the night, he reflects on the violence of the evening, acknowledging to himself that such grim work is simply part of his duty. He reflects on the unchanging nature of their bond over the past year. To the world, she is a radiant princess knight, and he is nothing more than a parasite living off her grace. Once, he had been an adventurer of some renown, but that life was stripped away when a fickle deity robbed him of his strength. As they share a meal, he can't help but feel the sting of his current state, lamenting how he has become a man who couldn't even fend off a stray dog without her presence. He looks at her, Alwyn Mabel Primrose MacLord, the woman to whom he has dedicated everything. His contribution to her cause is humble, centered on providing the sustenance she needs as she prepares to face the thousand-year labyrinth. He knows that by supporting her in these small ways, he aids her grand quest to restore her fallen kingdom. Later, he lounges lazily as she readies herself for the tasks ahead, playfully commenting on her stoic demeanor. She questions whether he intends to go out exploring the following day, but he simply brushes the inquiry aside with a nonchalant air. Her mind is fixed on a singular goal, obtaining the Star Life Crystal, a relic said to grant any wish and the key to her nation's revival. He watches her, noting the intensity in her eyes as she prepares to depart, her focus entirely on the trials that await her. Before she leaves, he assures her that he can have what she needs prepared within a few days, prompting a quiet word of thanks from her. As she walks away, he contemplates the true nature of the role he plays in her life. His gaze hardens as he acknowledges the dark reality of his existence. His true purpose is to safeguard her secrets at any cost. The memory of the lives he has taken, the thugs he recently dispatched, weighs on him, a bloody path he chose to ensure her safety. He views himself as a dual force in her world, serving as both the lifeline that sustains her and the silent noose for anyone who dares to threaten her. Several days have passed since the man's violent intervention in the alleyway. He now walks through the bustling streets of the Labyrinth City, known to many as the Gray Neighbor, where the air is thick with the scent of trade and the murmur of rumors. As he moves through the shadows of the colonnade, the whispers of the townspeople reach his ears, mocking the aegis of the war goddess for their lack of progress on the labyrinth's upper floors. The wanderer remains silent, his expression unreadable as he absorbs the news of the princess's struggles, his gaze fixed on some distant point. A voice calls out from the crowd, claiming victory in a wager regarding the party's failure, prompting a quiet curse from him as he continues his solitary trek. Arriving at the Adventurers Guild, he is greeted by April, the guild master's granddaughter, who playfully teases him with a nickname before directing him to the second floor in search of an old acquaintance. He ascends the stairs and finds Dez, a massive, bearded former comrade, who slams his mug down in surprise at the unexpected visit. The two men sit together, and while the giant questions if this visit marks a return to the life of an active adventurer, the dark-haired man quickly dismisses the idea, much to the other's disappointment. He finds himself physically accosted by the boisterous veteran, who clings to him while pleading for his return to the front lines. The man complains that the Valkyrie's shield has been struggling ever since the retirement of key members like Radvige and Lusta, leaving the party severely shorthanded. He listens with a stoic expression as his companion explains that Alwyn's mood has soured significantly since his departure. It seems the labyrinth exploration has hit a wall, and the lack of progress is weighing heavily on the entire team. Meanwhile, she stands amidst the ruins of the labyrinth, her gaze fixed on the path ahead as she grapples with their stagnation. She searches for the root cause of their failure, frustrated by the uncertainty that clouds their next move. Back at the guild, the veteran adventurer lets out a hearty laugh, dismissing the tension with a grin. He boasts that if he were to join the fray, his strength alone would be worth 100 men, though his companion remains entirely unimpressed by the blatant flattery. They settle at a wooden table, the surrounding hall filled with the low hum of other parties planning their next ascents. The bearded man points out that while his friend has been idle, the city has seen an influx of highly capable new talent. He begins to list the rising stars who are making a name for themselves. Rex, the golden swordsman, who masters both sword and spear. The Medusa sisters, known as the Snake Queens of the magic arts. And Nick, a former thief leading the Golden Fleece expedition team. The former adventurer narrows his eyes, processing the news of these formidable rivals. His companion emphasizes that the exploration rate of these newcomers has already surpassed that of the Valkyrie's shield, a fact that surely stings. He leans back, concluding that it is only natural for Alwyn to feel the pressure of being overtaken. His friend offers a non-committal response, his mind already turning over the implications of this shift in the city's power dynamic. He listens as his companion mentions a rumor about Alwyn's party seeking new members while a cart rattles by outside, hauling the massive, limp carcass of a manticore through the busy street. He hears a piercing scream shatter the mundane chatter of the tavern and rushes to the balcony, his eyes widening as he sees the supposedly dead beast beginning to stir atop its transport. He watches in horror as the creature erupts into a frenzy, shattering the wooden cart with a bone-chilling roar that sends the surrounding crowd into a panic. He sighs at the incompetence of the rookies who failed to deliver a proper finishing blow as the beast lunges toward the defenseless townspeople. He notices the beast is suddenly intercepted by a hooded figure descending from the rooftops, a warrior who clearly knows that manticores often feign death to lure hunters into a trap. He is stunned as the newcomer strikes with a blur of motion, her blade carving through the air to bring the monster low in a single, lethal stroke. He continues to watch from above as she stands calmly amidst the aftermath, her cape fluttering while the crowd erupts in stunned, grateful cheers. He observes Alwyn and her companions arrive on the scene, their faces etched with shock as the mysterious warrior turns her gaze toward them. She stands amidst the aftermath as the red-haired warrior rushes forward, dropping to one knee in a formal salute. The newcomer offers a profuse apology for her tardiness, citing delays caused by the heavy fog, but the noblewoman quickly dismisses the formality, urging her companion to drop the royal titles and speak plainly. Welcoming her with open arms, she pulls the warrior into a warm embrace, expressing her gratitude for the long journey the woman undertook to reach them. Looking into the warrior's eyes, she offers a gentle smile and a word of encouragement, reaffirming that she is truly counting on her strength for the trials ahead. From the periphery, the fortune teller watches the reunion with a faint, knowing smirk, his interest piqued by the arrival of such a capable-looking addition to the group. He turns his gaze toward the nearby structure, pondering whether these newcomers are indeed the reinforcements they have been expecting. A formal party of 4 adventurers stands ready, their diverse gear and disciplined posture marking them as seasoned veterans of the guild. Rejoining the group, the noblewoman introduces the newcomer as Noelle, an old acquaintance and the niece of the retired Lord Lusta, bridging the gap between the old guard and the new arrival. Stepping forward with a sharp, disciplined salute, Noelle introduces herself to the assembled party, explaining that while her experience lies in hunting monsters in the harsh borderlands rather than exploring dungeons, she is confident that her blade will not fail them. She speaks with a fierce, formal determination, pledging her life to the restoration of her homeland and vowing to serve as Alwyn's sword in her uncle's stead. Alwyn, however, gently urges her to relax, reminding her that the group has only just returned from their long travels, and there is no need for such immediate intensity. While the young warrior's enthusiasm remains high, the focus shifts away from the group to a dimly lit tavern elsewhere in the city. At the bar, a massive, tattooed man sits in silence until a subordinate with a bowl-cut hairstyle approaches, reporting that the shield of the war goddess, Alwyn's party, is currently in a state of flux. He listens intently, a grim smile playing on his lips as he considers the news of the party's recent addition. To him, the arrival of a newcomer suggests a shift in the group's balance, a potential weakness that can be exploited by those patient enough to wait for the right moment to strike. His gaze hardens as he explains to his men that this instability is exactly what they have been waiting for. He identifies the gap in the party's defenses, seeing the perfect opportunity to strike while they are still adjusting to their new dynamic in the presence of the red-haired newcomer. The man, known as Oswald, finally declares his ultimate goal, to use Alwyn's status as a former royal for his own ends. With a chilling resolve, he commands his followers to take Alwyn's head, signaling the start of a dangerous new conspiracy against the adventuring party for the sake of his organization, the Gunkai. Standing before her assembled team, the noble leader confirms that everyone is present. She begins to outline their formation for the upcoming descent into the labyrinth, specifically assigning Virgil, Ralph, and Noel to hold the front line. She then turns her attention to the support roles, instructing Clifford to provide magical backup, while Seraphina handles healing from a safe distance in the rear. As they begin their march toward the imposing entrance, she reminds them that this is Noel's first real expedition. They will start on the upper, shallower floors to ensure their teamwork is seamless before venturing deeper. The young warrior looks on with quiet determination, knowing they will only move to the next floor once their coordination is proven. With a final command, the leader signals the start of their journey, and the heavy gates of the dungeon groan open to receive them. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit tavern far from the dungeon's mouth, Mashu sits quietly with his drink. He listens intently to the surrounding chatter, catching mentions of a rowdy group known as the Flock of Crows that has been causing trouble lately. His companion, Dez, lets out a drunken laugh and asks if he's heard about the recent antics of those muscle-brained fools. He seems surprised that the stranger is out of the loop regarding the local troublemakers. In a darker corner of the city, Oswald and his gang of thugs nurse their own grievances. They growl about outsiders interfering in their territory and vow to give any newcomers a brutal welcome they won't soon forget. Back at the bar, the stranger sighs as he realizes no useful information about the liberation trade will be found here today. He stands up, deciding it's time to move on before he gets caught up in any local brawls. His gaze fixed on the world outside the window. He sits at a table laden with food, noting that Alwyn should be returning soon. Turning his attention to the woman across from him, he inquires if the Valkyrie's shield is operating smoothly. As they continue their meal, he observes that Noel's recent addition to the group might be a factor, while she reflects on the initial awkwardness that followed the newcomer's arrival at the labyrinth's entrance. This tension had manifested earlier when she was forced to intervene between her comrades, urging the knight, Virgil, to remain calm as Noel voiced concerns regarding their current military strength. The disagreement had escalated quickly, with Virgil dismissively questioning what a mere newcomer could possibly understand, though she had stood her ground, simply stating her observation that their numbers seemed insufficient. Back in the present, he listens intently as she recounts the friction within her ranks, specifically how Virgil's stubbornness clashed with the others, before he asks her directly what her own stance on the matter is. She had already made her decision, however, informing the group that with the change in membership, a reassessment of their numbers was mandatory, effectively silencing Virgil's protests by declaring the matter closed. With the internal dispute settled for the moment, the entire party gathers in the courtyard, their gear checked and their expressions grim as they prepare for the journey ahead. They finally march out through the massive stone gates of the city, the weight of their mission hanging over them as a subordinate's parting words acknowledge her status as their princess. She sits across from her companion, the atmosphere heavy with the day's events. She reflects on the shift in the group's dynamic, noting that ever since Noel joined and Lusta left, the air has felt wrong, as if the very foundation of their unity has been shaken. Staring into the depths of her wine glass, her own reflection stares back, mirroring her confusion. She admits to herself that she simply doesn't understand what is happening to her team or why the camaraderie they once shared has vanished so completely. Seeking guidance, she asks Mashu what he thinks she should do to fix the situation. She wonders aloud if the fault lies with her instructions, questioning why the atmosphere has become so stifling and if her leadership is to blame for the growing rift. He offers a small, knowing smile as he looks out at the moonlit night through the window. He remarks on her kind-hearted nature, suggesting that the reason for the friction is actually quite simple, though perhaps difficult for her to see from her position. As he continues to eat, he drops a bombshell. The reason for the discord is that she isn't actually the leader of the party. She looks at him in stunned silence, her eyes wide with shock at such a blunt and unexpected assessment of her role. He clarifies his point, acknowledging that while she is undoubtedly the heart and center of Valkyrie's shield, the true leadership role was held by someone else. He explains that being the focus of everyone's loyalty is not the same as managing the group's daily operations. He explains that while everyone gathered under her charisma, it was the retired knight who efficiently managed the group and handled the mundane tasks. It was his quiet competence that kept the gears turning while she served as their inspirational figurehead. He punctuates his point by cutting into his meal, noting that this individual took care of an absurd amount of chores while she remained the figurehead. Without that logistical support, the cracks in the party's foundation are finally beginning to show. He continued his explanation, noting that even after the departure of the Virgin Knight, a delicate balance had been maintained within the party. He laid bare the truth. Virgil had been the one truly steering the course of Valkyrie's shield, acting as its practical leader while others merely followed the charismatic front. He then shifted the focus to the newcomer, Noelle, whose sudden arrival and aggressive bid for control shattered the group's unspoken understanding. It was clear to him that her actions were a calculated move, likely orchestrated by her uncle to seize influence over the party's direction. Seeing her distress, he proposed a solution. He would step in to handle the negotiations and logistical burdens that Virgil once carried. When she questioned her own capability for such tasks, he bluntly stated that everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses, and hers simply did not lie in management. He reassured her that she didn't need to change who she was. Her role was to remain the charismatic spearhead, the one who inspired the party and led the charge into the depths of the dungeon, leaving the messy details of leadership and administration to him. As she voiced her concerns about the fracturing party, he offered a chilling alternative. If the others became too much of a nuisance, he could simply eliminate the problem. He spoke of putting them in their place with a casualness that suggested he saw them as little more than obstacles to be cleared, ensuring they understood exactly who held the true power. Horrified by his cold suggestion, she erupted in anger, refusing to let any harm come to her precious companions. She declared that she would find her own way to fix the party and stormed out into the night, her heart heavy with the realization of her own perceived inadequacies and the dark path he was suggesting. Left alone under the vast, starlit sky, he watched her departure with a pensive gaze. He reflected on his own path, acknowledging that he was still far from becoming the legendary pillar of strength known as the Great Tree of Cameron. The group sat gathered around a wooden table, the air thick with the smell of food and the weight of a new proposal. Alwyn, leaning back with a confident air, introduced the idea of a formal division of labor, a suggestion she claimed came from her position as their leader. As she spoke, the image of Noelle, the newcomer, lingered in their minds, her presence already shifting the group's dynamic. The plan involved assigning specific roles, logistics, command, and even menial chores to each member, a move that Virgil questioned with a look of mild surprise, wondering if this was truly necessary. He listened as Clifford, the young mage, took a sip of his drink and pointed out the strategic advantage of Noelle's lineage. He argued that they should lean into her status as Lord Lusta's niece to smooth their path forward, a pragmatic view that seemed to prioritize efficiency over personal feelings. The princess offered a small, knowing smile in response, her gaze dropping to the dark liquid in her mug. It was a quiet moment of reflection amidst the tactical discussion, acknowledging the complexities of the alliances they were forming. Suddenly, the serious atmosphere was punctured by Seraphina's boisterous laughter as she teased Clifford for his stiff demeanor. He, however, remained unimpressed, his expression souring as he found little humor in the elf's light-hearted jab. A glass of ice water was set firmly on the table, the clink of ice against glass punctuating a call for calm. The gesture served as a grounding point, a reminder to stay focused on the matter at hand despite the internal friction. The young mage leaned forward then, his voice dropping to a more serious tone as he addressed the table. Clifford made it clear that his loyalty, and that of the others, lay with Alwyn, emphasizing that they were the ones who had stood by her side long before this newcomer arrived. They exchanged uneasy glances, the tension between the old guard and the new addition palpable in the room. Sensing the growing unease, Alwyn clapped her hands together with a bright, forced cheerfulness, attempting to sweep the conflict aside and bring the meeting to a close. She raises her mug high, her voice ringing out as she proposes a toast to celebrate the new structure of the shield of the goddess. Her companions at the table look on, some with smiles, as they prepare to join in the celebration. Following her lead, the blonde knight lifts his own wooden tankard, his face bright with optimism as he toasts to their collective future. With a hearty shout of cheers, he prepares to take a celebratory drink. However, the celebration is cut short when he inadvertently collides with a massive, tattooed man passing by. The impact sends the contents of the knight's mug splashing across the stranger's broad, scarred chest, drawing a low, menacing growl from the giant as the knight looks on in horror. He stares in shock as the liquid drips down the stranger's skin, the man's expression darkening with immediate hostility. The giant demands to know what the adventurer thinks he's doing, his voice dripping with a dangerous edge. Rising from his seat with a sudden, violent motion, the tattooed brute looms over the knight, accusing him of intentional disrespect. Despite the knight's attempts to de-escalate the situation, the tension in the room spikes as the giant's aggression becomes undeniable. From a nearby table, the young mage watches the confrontation with growing unease, her small hands clenching as she whispers a warning about the dangers of adventurers brawling in such a place. She tries to maintain a sense of calm, suggesting that everyone should simply enjoy their drinks and keep the peace, hoping that reason might still prevail over the brewing violence. Her hopes are shattered in an instant as the giant suddenly brings a heavy mug crashing down onto the knight's head with a sickening thud. As the knight collapses to the floor, the rest of the party can only watch in stunned silence at the sudden, brutal escalation. He lay motionless as the tavern erupted into further violence. Oswald, the tattooed brute, didn't stop at one victim. He lunged at the young mage, Clifford, with a heavy blow that sent the boy reeling. Amidst the crashing furniture and screams, a cold command cut through the air. They were to leave at least one survivor to serve as a messenger of this brutality. Having finished his grim work, the giant took a long pull from his mug, sighing with the satisfaction of a job well done. Outside, under the indifferent glow of the moon, the elegant woman slipped away into the night. Nearby, the dark-haired stranger watched her departure with a scowl, clearly irritated by the trouble her companions brought with them. He began to walk through the quiet streets, reflecting that perhaps getting involved wasn't such a bad change of pace. His musings were cut short when he spotted the woman again, but before he could approach, a frantic shout of "Princess" echoed through the alley. A young man in armor came charging past, his face a mask of desperation. The armored youth, Ralph, didn't slow down, his voice cracking as he called out for his lady. He was desperate to find her, his eyes wide with the fear that something terrible had already transpired in the chaos of the tavern. He reached a doorway and paused, his mind racing with dark possibilities. He feared that some sudden affliction or strange illness had struck his companions in the wake of the tavern brawl, leaving them vulnerable. He was met by the stranger, who turned to face the frantic knight and asked what was wrong. Behind him, the woman stood silently, her presence a calm contrast to the knight's visible agitation as he struggled to find the words to explain the disaster. He bowed his head, offering a hurried apology for the late-night intrusion. His voice trembled as he began to explain the situation, mentioning the names of Virgil and the others who had been caught in the crossfire of Oswald's sudden and brutal rage. He dropped into a deep, formal bow, his voice thick with regret. He lamented his failure to protect them despite being right there, while the woman watched from the shadows of the hallway, the weight of the night's events finally settling over them all. He stands there, hand to his head, trying to process the trauma of the ambush. Mashu's voice cuts through his panic, urging him to stay calm and explain exactly what happened to the rest of the group. Because of the sudden assault, Virgil and Clifford were quickly overwhelmed by the thugs. As they lay defeated on the cobblestones, a heavy boot stepped forward, signaling the arrival of their captor's leader, while Hector stood by, having successfully executed the trap. The massive figure of Oswald loomed over the bound pair inside a dimly lit tavern, satisfied that he now held the leverage needed for a negotiation. Coughing up blood, Virgil looked up with a defiant but broken gaze, demanding to know the identity of his attackers, while Clifford sobbed in terror behind him. In response, Oswald delivered a brutal kick to the knight's ribs, scoffing at the idea that this was a simple robbery for coin. He made it clear his disdain for adventurers ran much deeper than mere greed. Back in the present, the warrior knelt before Alwyn and Mashu, his voice trembling as he explained that the group had been targeted from the very beginning by a man named Hector, who had a specific message for the princess. He continued, relaying the chilling message intended for the princess from Oswald, a high-ranking member of the Scales within the Swarm organization, who demanded her presence. Meanwhile, back at the tavern, the tattooed plotter sat comfortably with a pipe, issuing a final ultimatum. If Alwyn did not arrive at the Running Trent within the hour, her companions would be left to rot in the gutters. The young woman's eyes widen in a mixture of disbelief and growing dread as the weight of the ultimatum sinks in. The fortune-teller's gaze remains fixed on her, silent and expectant, waiting for the inevitable reaction to his grim news. She looks down at the armored man, who remains on his knees with his voice heavy from a mix of shame and unwavering faith. He speaks of her legendary mercy, reminding her that the lives of their captured friends now rest entirely in her hands while the silence in the room becomes suffocating. A sharp, sudden movement cuts through the tension as a hand slams down with finality, punctuating the gravity of the situation. The sentiment behind the gesture is clear. They believe in her, certain that she would never turn her back on those who have fought by her side. He stands tall before her, his expression unreadable as he delivers a final, cold warning about the urgency of the matter. He urges her to decide quickly, noting that the men holding her companions are notoriously short-tempered and won't wait forever, forcing her to confront the grim reality of the path ahead. They stand in the dimly lit room, the tension thick as the night demands to know the stranger's intentions. Alwyn, her face etched with worry, listens as the man she knows as Mashu remains frustratingly composed. She urges him to act, fearing for the lives of her captured companions, but he simply sighs, seemingly unmoved by her desperation. He turns his gaze toward her, explaining with cold logic that the enemy's true objective is her very person and the prestige of her name. He reveals the dark reputation of Oswald, a man known for leaving a trail of destruction and corpses in his wake, suggesting that their situation is far more dire than she realizes. Continuing his grim assessment, he points out that her status as a former royal and a renowned knight makes her an invaluable prize. He notes the connection between the guild master and the man known as the Shield of the Princess, concluding with a harsh suggestion. She should abandon any hope of saving them, as their luck has simply run out. In response to his callous suggestion to simply recruit new members, she slams her hand onto the table in a fit of righteous fury. She refuses to abandon her friends and declares her intention to confront Oswald directly to settle the matter. Seeing her resolve, he relents with a weary sigh, agreeing to accompany her despite his reservations. As they prepare to move, the young knight interjects, his voice trembling with concern as he warns of the immense danger ahead. He suggests a different approach, wondering if they could simply settle the dispute with a payment of gold to avoid further conflict. The stranger immediately cuts him off, extending a finger toward the young man's face to command his full attention. He begins to lecture the knight on the harsh realities of dealing with men like Oswald, his tone sharp and uncompromising. He explains that for thugs and criminals, face and reputation are more valuable than any amount of gold. While they might crave the money, they cannot simply accept a bribe if it makes them appear weak or easily swayed, as their authority rests on the fear they command. With a final, dismissive poke to the knight's forehead, he concludes that attempting to buy their way out is the most foolish path they could take. Behind them, Alwyn watches the exchange in silence, her expression unreadable as she considers the weight of his words. He leads the way through the dim streets, his presence a quiet reassurance to the group. One of the companions notes that he understands these underworld dealings far better than any of them, urging the others not to look so grim as they approach the meeting point. Upon arrival, he wordlessly hands over the heavy pouch, fulfilling his part of the bargain. With the payment delivered, the noblewoman steps forward, her voice firm as she demands the immediate release of their companion. She watches the exchange with a sharp, wary eye, questioning if money was truly all they sought. Behind her, the others exchange uneasy glances, sensing that the tension in the air has not dissipated with the handover of the gold. Across from them, the massive, tattooed leader remains unmoved, a dark amusement flickering in his eyes. He mutters about the predictable nature of those who think gold can solve every problem, his subordinates standing ready at his back. Suddenly, the brute's expression hardens as he declares a change of heart, his voice cold and final. Without a moment's hesitation, he commands his subordinate to execute the captive, the sudden betrayal catching everyone off guard. The noblewoman recoils in horror, her mind racing to understand why the agreement was so violently discarded. The giant scoffs, claiming that her party was the one to initiate the conflict by insulting his men, effectively voiding any previous arrangement. As his men press a cold blade against the captive's throat, he looms over the group, demanding to know how they intend to compensate him for the perceived slight. The captive trembles, the edge of the sword drawing a thin line of blood as the situation spirals out of control. Faced with this brutal ultimatum, she bows her head, her hair shadowing her face as the weight of the moment settles upon her. The silence that follows is heavy, thick with the realization that diplomacy has failed and a much darker path lies ahead. She fixes him with a cold, unwavering gaze, demanding that he lower the blade before any further words are exchanged. In response, the massive man simply snaps his fingers with a dismissive air. With a cruel smirk, he allows the dagger to plunge into the captive's leg, mockingly apologizing for his hand slipping as blood spatters the floor. The sight of the senseless violence causes her companions to draw their steel in a flash of righteous anger. The brute merely chuckles at their defiance, questioning if they truly intend to challenge him right then and there. She remains motionless, the weight of the situation pressing down on the room. He continues his taunts, mocking the small group and asking if they honestly believe such meager numbers can overcome his men. Her allies exchange grim looks, their resolve hardening even as the odds stack against them. Realizing that the path of diplomacy has been utterly severed, she slowly draws her own blade, her expression shifting to one of grim necessity. There is no other way forward but through steel. Before the first blow can be struck, the fortune teller suddenly interjects, stepping boldly between the two opposing forces with a sharp clap of his hands. He urges both sides to lower their tempers, suggesting that since this entire dispute began over a simple drink, it should be settled in a similar fashion. He claims to have a much better proposal to resolve the conflict without further bloodshed. Turning to the group, he reveals a bottle of wine and proposes a simple drinking contest to decide the winner. The suggestion leaves her and her companions momentarily stunned by the sheer absurdity of the offer in the face of such violence. He stands confidently, explaining the simple rules. They will drink one-on-one, and the first to pass out loses. He pours a drink, emphasizing that a brawl would only lead to more injuries and bring the city guards down on them all. Continuing his logic, he points out that everyone ending up in a dungeon together would be a pathetic conclusion to the night. Oswald remains silent, his expression unreadable as he weighs the proposal. He leans in, questioning if Oswald's pride can handle the potential fallout of a failed negotiation. He warns that without Oswald's leadership, the organization's foundation would crumble, and his reputation would be ruined by a petty squabble over pocket change. Turning his attention to the bound captives, he clearly defines the stakes. If he wins, the 3 prisoners must be set free immediately. However, if he loses, he tells Oswald that he can do whatever he wishes with them, whether that means selling them or worse. He seeks confirmation from Alwyn, who looks on with a mixture of fear and reluctant trust. Seeing her silent assent, Oswald finally snaps, slamming his hand onto the table and declaring that he will take the bet. But the brute isn't finished, adding a dark caveat. If he emerges victorious, he demands that the noblewoman become his personal prize. The air in the room grows heavy as the gravity of the wager sinks in, and even the guards look on in shock. He accepts the terms with a calm nod, but then shifts the focus. He clarifies that while he is setting the terms, he won't be the one actually competing in the contest. The revelation leaves the room in stunned silence, as the gaze of everyone present shifts toward the unexpected champion who must now carry the weight of their lives. He watches from the sidelines as the tension in the room thickens. The fortune teller calmly interprets the situation, asking if the goal is simply to raise the stakes of the gamble. His proposal is met with a sudden movement as the noblewoman stands, her chair scraping against the floorboards. She addresses the tattooed giant directly, declaring her readiness to begin the contest. Her gaze is steady and full of resolve, showing no fear of the challenge ahead. Virgil and Noelle are struck with disbelief as Alwyn takes her seat at the table. The knight urgently tries to stop her, his voice filled with concern for the reckless path she seems to be choosing. He steps forward, desperately offering to take her place in whatever trial awaits, but she shuts him down with a sharp, unwavering gaze. She insists that since she was the one specifically named for this challenge, she will be the one to see it through to the end. He is told to stay calm by the mysterious stranger, who places a steadying hand nearby. While the knight remains skeptical and tense, the stranger moves toward the center of the room, his calm demeanor contrasting with the rising tension of the tavern. As he stands nearby, Alwyn declares her absolute resolve, stating she has no intention of backing down from his confrontation. The stranger watches her closely, questioning the exact meaning of her defiance in the face of such a dangerous opponent. She watches as a heavy bottle of Death's Kiss is slammed onto the table, its name alone enough to warn of its lethal potency. The rules are laid out with a smirk. The challenger must finish the drink before the sand in the hourglass runs out, or face immediate defeat. He officially begins the contest by pouring the first glass, the amber liquid catching the light of the flickering candles. Amidst the clinking of glass, the knight leans in to whisper a worried question to the stranger, wondering if their lady truly has the constitution to survive such a trial. The knight's worries are ignored as the tattooed giant drains his glass in a single, effortless gulp and demands the next. The surrounding crowd erupts into a frenzy of cheers and laughter, fully aware of the giant's reputation as a legendary and unbeatable drinker. He drains his glass, but the stranger remains focused, internally weighing the situation with a calculated eye. He realizes that if Alwyn falters, he will have to step in and handle the fallout of this foolish game himself. Though for now, he is content to let the spectacle unfold. He watches the rowdy crowd with a cold, calculating gaze, acknowledging that while Alwyn might be furious later, he has already decided on a grim contingency. If the situation spirals out of control, he will simply eliminate everyone in the room. Outside the tavern, the cheers of the crowd echo through the night air as more drinks are called for, the onlookers inside marveling at the sheer endurance being displayed. More than an hour has slipped away, and the tension in the room has thickened like the dregs of a heavy ale. While the spectators whisper in awe of the princess's resilience, Oswald's initial confidence begins to flicker, replaced by a growing, frustrated disbelief as she matches him drink for drink. He leans in, his eyes gleaming with a predatory malice as he pours another glass, openly mocking her highborn status and relishing the thought of breaking her spirit once the alcohol finally takes its toll. Despite his bravado, the massive man begins to falter, his face flushed and slick with sweat as the potent brew finally begins to overwhelm his legendary constitution. As the last grains of sand slip through the hourglass, the giant finally reaches his limit and collapses onto the table with a heavy thud, leaving the room in a stunned silence while the observer in the shadows notes the conclusion of the trial. The sudden silence is broken by a wave of disbelief from the onlookers, who can hardly process that the princess has actually triumphed over the undefeated champion. She remains seated, her gaze fixed intently on the empty glass before her, as the weight of the victory and the drink settles over her. She had won, but the cost was evident in the worried eyes of her companions. Virgil watched her closely, his brow furrowed with concern as he checked on her condition, his own face slick with the sweat of anxiety. He watched as Noelle stepped in to support her, wrapping a steady arm around her waist to keep her upright. Despite the haze of the alcohol, she remained fixated on the challenge, muttering for the next round even as they guided her toward the exit, her voice a mere whisper of its former strength. Moments later, the cool night air hit them as they navigated the quiet, cobblestone streets. Noelle had taken to carrying her on her back, the rhythmic sound of their footsteps echoing against the timber-framed buildings under the watchful gaze of a full moon. As they moved, Virgil kept a close watch, asking softly if she was holding up. She barely responded, her head resting heavily on Noelle's shoulder, her consciousness slipping in and out as the world blurred around her. In response to the silence, she let out a faint, weary sigh. Her eyes, though clouded with exhaustion, still held a flicker of the indomitable spirit that had carried her through the contest, even as her body finally began to succumb to the strain. Suddenly, the quiet was broken by the appearance of their comrades, who looked as though they had crawled out of a nightmare. Battered, bloodied, and leaning on their weapons for support, they expressed a profound relief at seeing her safe, their faces etched with the trauma of their own ordeal. Overwhelmed by guilt, the weary warriors dropped to their knees, bowing their heads in a desperate plea for forgiveness. They lamented their failure to protect her and the disastrous outcome of their mission, their voices heavy with shame as they faced their mistress in their broken state. They watched as she signaled for Noelle to set her down, her movements slow but deliberate. Standing on her own 2 feet once more, she looked over her broken party and asked a single, piercing question. How did she appear to them now, in the wake of their shared defeat and her own hollow victory? She stands supported by the stranger as the knight speaks with fervent admiration. He declares his profound respect for her, praising her tireless efforts and the sacrifices she makes for the sake of their kingdom's restoration. His words are sharply cut off by the stranger, who dismisses the noble sentiment with a blunt observation. He points out that she is simply a drunkard, and a heavily intoxicated one at that, causing the knight to recoil in disbelief. This blatant disrespect triggers an immediate, angry outburst from the shield-bearer, who demands the man watch his tongue. The stranger merely chuckles at the indignation, while she remains slumped against him, seemingly unbothered by the harsh truth. She finally speaks, her voice thick but honest as she admits to her current frailty. She acknowledges her stumbling steps and slurred words, confessing that in this moment, she is a burden who cannot accomplish anything without the help of others. As she speaks, a vision of the past or a dream of the future flickers in her mind, a vow made for the sake of her people and the rebirth of their land. Though she admits she lacks strength now, the fire in her eyes promises that she will grow into the leader they need. Drawing herself up with a sudden, regal dignity, she leans upon a heavy blade and issues a quiet challenge. She asks if they are still willing to follow her, and in response, the weary warriors drop to their knees, pledging their lives and loyalty to their sovereign. She turns her gaze toward the horizon, her face hardening with a singular, cold determination. Every action, every humiliation, and every drop of blood spilled is for the sake of the motherland. Under the pale light of the moon, the broken but resolute band of adventurers remains bowed before her. They are no longer just a group of mercenaries, but a unit bound by a shared, desperate hope. Though she had finally succumbed to her exhaustion and the effects of the drink, the weight of her lineage, the house of Maclord, still hung heavy in the air. Watching her rest, the fortune teller mused that perhaps this misfortune had been a blessing in disguise, providing the perfect catalyst for the group's newfound unity. As the party began to move, he realized those who had underestimated her would soon learn a hard lesson. She was far more than a mere princess in need of shielding. He lingered for a moment, glancing back at the silhouette of the woman he now deemed a master truly worthy of his service. The quiet of the night was shattered when one of the thugs, driven by a desperate need to reclaim his bruised ego, lunged from the shadows with a roar of defiance. Before the assailant could strike, a flash of steel intervened. A newcomer in a pristine white coat moved with lethal grace, severing the threat in a single, fluid motion. Standing over the whimpering man, the stranger calmly inquired about the location of the guild's graveyard, his presence commanding and cold as he ignored the chaos he had just ended. He turned his gaze toward the fortune teller, a flicker of recognition crossing his face as he acknowledged the man he had apparently been searching for. He finally found what he was looking for, addressing the man before him with a title that carried immense weight: Lord Vincent Carlyle. The revelation struck Mashu like a physical blow, his eyes widening in a mix of shock and recognition before he lowered his gaze, offering a quiet, heavy apology. He turned to follow the others as they prepared to depart, his expression unreadable. Sensing his unease, Alwyn leaned in, her voice a soft whisper as she questioned if the newcomer was an acquaintance. He confirmed it with a somber nod, admitting that the memories of their connection had only just resurfaced. His footsteps echoed against the stone as the name Vincent Carlyle repeated in his mind like a haunting refrain. A fleeting image of a woman with a gentle smile flickered through his thoughts. Vanessa, a face from a past he was only beginning to piece back together. The noble stood with a cold, aristocratic poise, his presence a stark reminder of a recent tragedy. He was the brother of Vanessa, the guild's appraiser who had recently met a grim end, leaving Mashu to wonder what business this grieving, lethal man truly had with him. Mashu sits in the dim light of his room, head bowed in deep contemplation as the weight of his secrets presses down on him. His mind drifts back to a previous inquiry, remembering the moment he sought the location of the cemetery managed by the Adventurers Guild, a place where the dead are kept under watch. He lets out a weary sigh, his footsteps heavy and rhythmic as he moves through the quiet space, the exhaustion of his double life evident in every motion. The image of Vincent Carlyle haunts his thoughts, and the man wonders why Vanessa's brother would have any reason to be present in this specific town. Looking down at his hands, he recalls the events of months prior, questioning if the rumors about the Royal Guard's involvement in Vanessa's affairs were more than just hearsay. The memory of his grim task resurfaces with chilling clarity. He reflects on how he was the one to end Vanessa's life, and subsequently, that of her lover, Sterling, to prevent the truth from spreading further. He had eventually tracked down Vanessa's home, only to discover a stash of illicit drugs hidden away, a secret that suggested even her brother Oscar was entangled in something far darker than simple greed. Suddenly, the door opens and Alwyn stands there, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and worry as she finds him alone in the dark and asks what he is doing. She stands before him, her voice trembling as she asks about what belongs to her, the tension between them thick and suffocating. A silver necklace clatters onto the floor with a sharp metallic ring, a cold reminder of the cruel hand of fate. Mashu reflects on the bitter irony of not only crossing paths with Alwyn, but also stumbling upon her deepest, most guarded secret. He kneels over the lifeless form of Vanessa, the Maclord family heirloom lying discarded nearby. The weight of the truth settles heavily upon him. Alwyn was suffering from severe addiction to the substance known as liberation poison, a secret she would have sacrificed anything to keep hidden from the world. A violent cough racks his frame as he frantically searches through the scattered documents by candlelight. He muses that Vanessa herself wasn't inherently evil. She had simply been unfortunate enough to witness something far beyond her station, a mistake that cost her everything. Nearby, a gloved hand reaches toward the floor as the candle's smoke curls into the air. The silent observer laments the burden of dealing with those who are too perceptive, wishing instead for the simplicity of the foolish who do not ask dangerous questions. Later, he sits alone on the edge of a sparse bed, the shadows of the room mirroring the darkness of his thoughts. He remains resolute, his gaze fixed forward as he acknowledges his unwavering commitment. To protect Alwyn's secret, he is prepared to do whatever is necessary, and he harbors no regret for the life he took to ensure that silence. He clenches his fist, the skin tightening over his knuckles as he contemplates the sudden threat of a long-delayed vengeance for a fallen sister. With his resolve hardened, he strides through the silent halls and ascends the staircase, his footsteps echoing his grim determination. He vows that no obstacle to Alwyn's well-being will be tolerated, promising a ruthless end to any who interfere. Reaching his destination, he steps into a dimly lit room and leans over a bedside, gently inquiring about her condition. She lays slumped over the table, her long hair spilling across the surface as she struggled with the aftermath of the previous night's festivities. Despite her obvious discomfort and the way she shielded her eyes from the light, she insisted in a low voice that there was no problem. He watched her with a mix of concern and skepticism, acknowledging her stubbornness with a quiet understood. Privately, he couldn't help but wonder how she could claim to be fine after consuming so much alcohol the night before, questioning what she truly meant by saying there was no problem when she could barely lift her head. Seeing her state, he suggested that she take the day to rest and recover properly. He promised to take the initiative and inform the rest of the party, the group she usually led, that their planned exploration would have to be postponed due to her condition, a task she gratefully accepted with a weary nod and a request for him to handle it. Shortly after, 2 mugs of steaming liquid were prepared, their warmth offering a small measure of comfort in the quiet room. They sat together in silence for a moment, the steam from their drinks rising between them as the morning light filtered through the window. The conversation eventually turned to the events of the previous evening, specifically the man named Carlyle. He recalled the stranger's remarkable skill with a blade, noting that even while heavily intoxicated, his swordsmanship had been nothing short of masterful, a fact that seemed to weigh heavily on her as she listened. He then looked directly at her while taking a sip of his drink, asking if she was actually acquainted with the silver-haired noble. It had been clear to him from the way the man acted that he recognized her, and he sought to understand the nature of their connection and why it seemed to trouble her so. The memory of that cold, refined face lingered in the air, a silent reminder of the mysterious figure who had crossed their path and the secrets he might hold. He walked away, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Alwyn, still seated at the table, confirmed to her companion that the man was indeed Vanessa's older brother. While she had long known of his existence, this was the first time their paths had actually crossed. She recalled a conversation from years ago when Vanessa had spoken of him. He was 2 years older and possessed a natural, almost frightening talent with a blade. This history was a stark contrast to his sister's life. While Vanessa had an eye for fine art, he lacked any such interest. Instead of inheriting the family's merchant legacy, he had been adopted into a house of knights, eventually rising to serve the royal family directly by the age of 19. Mashu listened intently, his brow furrowed as he questioned why a man of such high standing would ever set foot in a place as derelict as this. The woman stared into her drink, her expression unreadable. She surmised that his arrival was almost certainly connected to the Holy Guard, a name that carried a weight of its own. He absorbed this information, his eyes narrowing as the pieces began to fall into place. It seemed the authorities were finally beginning to move in earnest, a development that changed the stakes of their current situation. "What exactly is that?" he asked, his voice low. She explained that, put simply, they were the Rayfield Royal Security Force, an organization he admitted to having heard whispers of in the shadows of the city. She went on to describe their origin, born from the growing anxiety of the king and the nobility over the gray neighbors and the rising tide of lawlessness. This new, independent body was tasked with rooting out smuggling and illegal trade, a mission Mashu found laughable. He scoffed at the idea, predicting that these self-important newcomers would fail spectacularly, likely ending up as nothing more than tools for the local corrupt guards, though Alwyn noted that any improvement to the town's safety would be a welcome change. The man looked down at his reflection in the dark liquid of his cup, the weight of the city's corruption pressing in on him. Regardless of her involvement, he felt himself being pulled deeper into the murky depths of this place as he set his mug back onto the wooden surface with a dull thud. He reflected on the precarious situation Alwyn faced, knowing she relied on a specific substance provided by an old contact to manage her condition. He understood that as the city's security tightened, the illicit trade of such drugs would be squeezed, making her medicine nearly impossible to obtain. Determined to prevent her from falling ill again, he rose suddenly, his mind made up. Reaching across the table, he gently took her hand in his, offering a reassuring squeeze. He urged her not to worry, insisting that she should simply leave the matter of her safety and her medicine to him. Despite his confidence, she remained deeply troubled, her gaze fixed on the table as she pleaded with him not to take any unnecessary risks or do anything reckless. He met her eyes with a soft, determined look, assuring her that he had no intention of being reckless. He explained that he couldn't bear the thought of her witnessing his end for her sake, especially when their fates were so closely intertwined. With a solemn vow, he promised to keep her safe. Without another word, he pulled her into a firm embrace, whispering that he would protect her no matter what challenges lay ahead. Caught in the sudden warmth of the gesture, she leaned into him, her expression a mix of surprise and deep-seated relief as she felt the sincerity of his promise. The quiet moment was shattered by a frantic pounding on the door, accompanied by a voice calling out his name with urgent desperation. Startled, he and Alwyn turned toward the entrance as the shouting continued. He recognized the voice immediately. It was April, and she sounded as though something was terribly wrong. He was caught off guard as the door burst open, his quiet moment with Alwyn shattered by April's frantic entrance. The girl gripped his arm, her voice trembling with urgency as she pleaded for him to come to the guild immediately. His initial annoyance at the interruption quickly turned to a cold realization as she explained the situation. The Holy Guard was demanding his presence. They were asking about Vanessa, a name that clearly struck a chord of alarm. Meanwhile, within the austere halls of authority, Vincent Carlyle sat composed behind a heavy desk, his fingers interlaced. Flanked by stoic guards wielding ornate halberds, the silver-haired noble waited, the weight of his position and the impending interrogation hanging heavy in the air. He stepped into the appraisal room of the Adventurers Guild, where the silver-haired noble awaited. Vincent Carlyle, the commander of the Holy Guard, greeted him warmly, acknowledging his arrival as Mashu. Because of their shared history, Vincent noted that Mashu had been quite close to Vanessa. He decided to be blunt, his gaze fixed on the man before him while others watched from the periphery. Leaning in, the noble asked the question that hung heavy in the air. Did he have any inkling who might have murdered Vanessa? Mashu remained stoic, his expression unreadable under the weight of the inquiry. In response, he simply stated he had no idea, sitting relaxed in the wooden chair across from the commander. The room felt small, the silence between them punctuated only by the gravity of the investigation. He then suggested that if Vincent wanted to hear rumors and stories, a tavern would be a much better setting than this sterile room. Vincent corrected him, insisting on being called by his name rather than his title, a request that Mashu found rather bothersome. Despite the casual banter, the intensity in the commander's eyes was unmistakable, burning with a singular, dark focus. He looked like a man possessed by the need to hunt down a killer, his silhouette framed against the weight of his own resolve. Shifting the conversation back to the facts, Mashu recalled hearing that Vanessa had been taken out by someone from the underworld. However, he noted that neither the specific organization nor the actual executioner had been identified yet. As they delve into the grim details, they discussed how the victim's neck had been snapped, a feat requiring immense physical power. They speculated on the culprit's nature, wondering if it was a man of great stature or perhaps even a member of the giant race. He watched as the silver-haired noble offered a shallow apology for his subordinate's lack of restraint, claiming the man had simply let his hand slip. He remained unmoved even as the guard's blade flashed in a crude attempt to test his resolve, the subordinate scoffing that he only wanted to see if the man was truly a coward. The aggressive subordinate eventually withdrew, leaving a heavy silence in the wake of his departure as the interrogation resumed. Vincent then shifted the conversation, turning his focus to the documents spread across the table. He noted that none of the men in Mashu's circle seemed to fit the profile of a suspect, describing them as a collection of oddities before deciding to change the line of questioning entirely. He began to recount Mashu's history with clinical precision, detailing his arrival in the city after retiring from adventuring. He pointed out that Mashu, often called the Mouthless, had taken various jobs from several women, specifically mentioning a name from the past, Polly. Mashu felt a shadow cross his face at the mention of Polly, though he maintained his silence as the weight of the past settled over him. He listened as the records revealed a disturbing pattern that the Holy Guard had uncovered. Years ago, Polly, his former lover and an acquaintance of Vanessa, had vanished without a trace, and now Vanessa herself had met a violent end. The interrogator leaned in, demanding to know the meaning behind the tragedies that seemed to follow the man sitting across from him, linking the two women's fates directly to him. He listens as the man across the table acknowledges the logic of the situation, though he notes the theory is only partially correct. The shackles on the table serve as a cold reminder of the current power dynamic. In response, the captive leans forward, his hands clasped tightly as he dismisses the entire premise as nothing more than a series of unfortunate coincidences. He reflects on the past, recalling how the warmth had long since drained from his relationship with Polly, leading to their eventual and final separation. Continuing his defense, he suggests that Vanessa's concern for Polly far outweighed his own, implying a depth of connection he didn't share. A fleeting memory of a woman's silhouette accompanies the heavy thought of missed opportunities and the lingering regret of not being able to do more for her. The Inquisitor absorbs this, his gaze fixed on the documents before him as he offers a quiet acknowledgement of the explanation. Suddenly, he tosses a handful of papers onto the table, the sudden movement drawing a sharp, questioning look from the man in custody. He watches the silence take hold, noting how the man across from him has suddenly become as quiet and still as a child facing a stern reprimand. He watches as Mashu's hand strikes the wooden surface with a sharp thud. The man across from him asks with a hint of impatience if their discussion has finally reached its conclusion. He offers a thin, practiced smile, promising to share any further recollections that might surface later. With a feigned sense of camaraderie, he adds that his desire to see the culprit brought to justice is just as strong as theirs, while the noble remains seated, his expression unreadable behind his steepled fingers. The man turns to depart, his silhouette stark against the light of the room, but he pauses as a sudden chill in the air stops him in his tracks. He glances back, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face as he mutters a confused inquiry. His gaze falls upon the papers spread across the table, their edges worn and ink-heavy with secrets. From the shadows, the noble's voice rings out with cold authority, declaring that their business is far from finished. He concedes that while a direct motive to kill Vanessa might be lacking, a new, more chilling possibility must be considered. He leans forward slightly, his eyes locking onto his target as he asks what might have been done for the sake of Lady Owl. His words hit the man like a physical blow, causing his pupil to contract in a moment of pure, unadulterated shock. The mask of composure he had so carefully maintained shatters instantly. revealing the raw terror of a man whose deepest secret has just been unearthed. Vincent begins the interrogation by bringing up Alwyn Mabel Primrose Maclord. He observes that the stranger's gaze toward her wasn't that of a commoner looking at a noble, but rather a protective one, akin to a father or an older brother watching over someone precious. Noticing a shift in the man's demeanor, he remarks on how the color of his eyes has changed under the scrutiny. The stranger remains silent, a bead of sweat rolling down his face as the psychological pressure of the conversation mounts. He continues, drawing from his extensive past as a knight who has faced countless criminals. He poses a rhetorical question, asking what the most troublesome type of adversary is to encounter in the line of duty. Without waiting for an answer, he declares that the most dangerous person is one who would not hesitate to kill for the sake of someone they love. The two men stand in a tense standoff, the air thick with unspoken accusations across the desk. He then slams a thick stack of documents onto the table, dismissing any idealistic notions the other might hold. These are testimonies regarding Alwyn, and he points out the cold reality. People protect her because their own survival and livelihoods depend entirely on her presence. As the stranger lets out a weary sigh, the noble notes that while Alwyn is famous and many gathered to support her quickly, there were no significant conflicts or troubles reported between her and Vanessa. He warns that evidence is unpredictable and can surface from the most unexpected places. Even the smallest, forgotten detail can eventually lead to the true motive of a culprit, unraveling the most carefully constructed lies. Finally, he challenges the man directly, asking if he can truly swear that nothing has happened since Alwyn arrived in this city. He casts a shadow of doubt on her supposed innocence, leaving the stranger to grapple with the weight of the implication as he stares at the documents. He remains silent as the investigator paces the room, papers in hand. Vincent remarks that the investigation is only beginning and the pile of testimonies will only grow larger as more people come forward. As the nobleman continues, he muses on how difficult it is to know where the threads of truth truly connect. He is certain that even among the most mundane stories, a core of reality is waiting to be found. The weight of these words causes a bead of sweat to roll down the prisoner's face. His mind drifts back to a memory of a woman cloaked in shadows, her face etched with a sorrow he once shared. He remembers walking away into the cold light of an alley, leaving the darkness behind. The investigator points out that while her secrets might have been overlooked before, the act of questioning witnesses often jogs the memory. He notes that someone, somewhere, must have seen her in places she shouldn't have been, and those small, forgotten details are now being brought to light by the common folk. A sudden, chilling realization strikes him. If her secret is ever exposed to the light of day, everything they have built will crumble. He stands alone in his mind, fists clenched against an invisible storm. With a weary sigh, the silver-haired man stands, noting the futility of trying to silence so many voices. It is simply impossible to eliminate every witness who might hold a piece of the puzzle. He looks visibly shaken, his brow furrowed in distress. Sensing the shift, Vincent asks if the mounting complications are finally starting to weigh on him. Attempting to regain his composure, the prisoner demands the return of his confiscated wallet and personal effects, hoping to steer the conversation away from the precipice. The investigator leans in, his sharp eyes fixed on the man's sweating face. He asks with cold curiosity if those items are truly that important, or if there is something else he is desperate to hide. He watches in silence as Vincent examines the small, circular trinket, identifying it as a temporary sundae. The noble notes that while its magical effects are minor, it is a legitimate enchanted item that should have remained in Vanessa's possession after being issued to her by the guild. Finding the situation increasingly peculiar, the investigator points out the glaring lack of witnesses to the supposed gift, given that the two were entirely alone at the time. In response, the man across the table grows visibly restless, his brow furrowing as he demands the immediate return of his property. He attempts to downplay the item's significance, suggesting that while it might fetch a decent price for someone burdened by debt, it hardly seems worth a life. He then poses a sharp, defensive question, asking if the noble is truly prepared to accuse him of murdering his own sister for such a meager price. The question hangs heavily in the air until the silver-haired man simply asks what would happen if that were indeed his conclusion. The atmosphere in the room shifts instantly, the silence becoming thick with a new, suffocating tension. He continues his scrutiny, wondering aloud why someone would keep such an object so close to their person unless it held a much deeper, perhaps spiritual, meaning. He then levels a startling accusation, asking if the man is a secret devotee of the sun god, a claim that is met with a frantic and immediate denial. Losing his composure entirely, the suspect erupts in a fit of rage, shouting that he has heard enough of these baseless insults and sleep-talking nonsense. He threatens to take his grievances to the church and expose the investigator's tactics, but the noble remains unmoved, stating that mere shouting and denials do not constitute evidence of innocence. The noble then reveals the true nature of the object. It is a solar eclipse, a sacred relic highly prized by followers of the sun god. He explains that these believers are permitted by their doctrine to conceal their faith to escape persecution, making the acquisition of such a holy item a powerful and plausible motive for murder. As the weight of the evidence settles, he questions why a non-believer would carry what they might consider a cursed item so carefully tucked away in their bag. The man can only stammer out further desperate denials, his face slick with the sweat of a cornered animal as his defense crumbles. He is pinned to the floor, the weight of the guard's boots pressing him into the wood as the crystal orb rolls away. Vincent Carlyle stands over him, declaring that the possession of such a relic is undeniable proof of his guilt. Despite the pressure, he grits his teeth in silent defiance, refusing to accept the accusation of being a sun god worshipper. Looking down at the confiscated item and the records, the noble admits his surprise that this was the true objective all along. With a cold efficiency, he commands his subordinates to transport the prisoner to their headquarters for further interrogation. The heavy iron doors of the facility slam shut with a resounding echo that fills the stone corridors. The guards discuss their next steps, confident that a thorough interrogation will reveal even more of the man's hidden transgressions. The interrogation quickly turns into a brutal ordeal as he is subjected to relentless physical abuse. Lashes from a whip tear into his skin while buckets of cold water are thrown over his battered frame. Yet he remains broken but silent under the assault. As the sun begins to set over the sprawling city, the shadows lengthen, mirroring the dark turn of events within the prison walls. Back in the confines of a damp cell, he coughs violently, spitting blood onto the stone floor as his body begins to fail him. A voice from the shadows mockingly notes his apparent resilience, while elsewhere, those who know him can only watch in helpless concern. The guards finally toss his limp, broken body into a larger, desolate chamber. Vincent Carlyle lingers at the entrance for a moment, observing the results of the day's questioning with a detached, clinical gaze. Turning to leave, the silver-haired man remarks on the prisoner's unexpected stubbornness before the heavy bars slide into place. He offers a chilling parting wish for the man to enjoy the coming day's torments, leaving him alone in the dark to stare up at the ceiling with a look of grim determination. He groans, the physical toll of the interrogation finally catching up to his battered body as he slumps against the cold stone wall of his cell. The memory of the silver-haired noble lingers, a cold presence that Mashu managed to manipulate by playing into the man's suspicions. He realizes that a simple confession would never have satisfied someone as calculating as Vincent. By subtly guiding the noble's attention toward the sun god, he ensured the focus remained exactly where he wanted it. It was a dangerous gamble, using himself as bait to steer the investigation away from more sensitive truths. He acknowledges the irony of his situation. While he is the one behind bars and covered in bruises, his plan has succeeded in protecting Alwyn's reputation. To him, the physical suffering is a small price to pay for her safety. His gaze remains sharp despite the blood matting his hair, fueled by the knowledge that the more one denies something to an intelligent man, the more they believe a deeper secret is being hidden. Slumping further into the shadows of the dungeon, he finds it almost humorous that he had to claim to be a devout follower of the sun god just to satisfy the noble's ego. As his consciousness wavers, he softly utters the name Vanessa into the silence. High above the dungeon, Alwyn gazes out at the moonlit night, wondering if this is the revenge he spoke of. Below, bound by heavy chains in the darkness, he admits to himself that this path is proving to be far more difficult than he initially anticipated. The cold stone of the dungeon walls offered no comfort as the silver-haired noble looked down at the broken man on the floor. He admitted his surprise, noting that the prisoner had managed to endure the interrogation for 2 full days. He stepped forward, grinding his boot into the man's chest to emphasize his dominance. With a voice devoid of pity, he demanded to know if the captive was finally ready to confess his secrets. The prisoner's eye flickered, barely open amidst the swelling and bruises, a silent testament to the ordeal he had survived. Unfazed by the silence, the noble began to reminisce, mentioning the 2.5 years he had spent alongside Vanessa. He seemed to be testing the prisoner's resolve with mentions of his past connections. He continued his psychological assault, mocking the man's supposed devotion. He pointed out that despite the prisoner's claims of caring for Vanessa, he hadn't reached out to her or the guild once during his long absence, even when her life might have been at stake. He sneered, questioning if such coldness was a tenet of the sun god's fate. In response to the relentless taunting, the man on the floor slowly shifted, his voice a raspy whisper as he prepared his final answer. The noble watched with a detached curiosity, waiting for a plea for mercy. Instead of words, the prisoner raised a trembling, blood-slicked hand and extended a single, defiant finger. He spat out a curse, telling the noble to rot in hell. The noble's expression hardened into one of cold disappointment. He realized then that there would be no reconciliation, only the finality of an execution. He is forced to look up as his captor grips a handful of his dark, messy hair, pulling his head back with cruel indifference. The silver-haired noble sneers, telling him to rejoice, for he has the honor of being the very first to face execution under this new authority. He remains motionless on the cold stone floor as the noble continues to loom over him, while two guards stand watch in the shadows, their presence a silent testament to the hopelessness of the situation. He suddenly slams the man's head against the hard floor, the impact echoing through the cell. He coldly recites the list of crimes: robbery, murder, and arson, declaring that these atrocities are more than sufficient to justify his sentence of death. Standing up and smoothing his ornate white coat, he looks down at the broken figure and mockingly suggests that now would be the time for tears. He weaves a narrative of a religious zealot seeking a divine artifact, claiming witnesses placed a man matching his description at the scene of the crime. His gaze remains icy as he points out the lack of an alibi, even going so far as to suggest that with the right drugs, the prisoner would have been capable of murdering his own kin. On the floor, the man's shackled hand twitches, a silent protest against the mounting fabrications. Turning his back on the scene, he walks toward his waiting subordinates, muttering about the incompetence of those who handle such matters so carelessly. He casually tosses out the decree that the execution will take place in a mere 2 days, leaving the prisoner lying motionless on the stones. As he strides away, his voice trails back with a final, mocking instruction for the condemned man to spend his remaining time in prayer to the sun god. His departure is interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps and a guard's futile attempt to bar the way. Alwyn strides into the light, her voice filled with desperation as she pleads for an audience, refusing to let the matter end there. She stands at the threshold of the damp dungeon, her voice ringing out with a plea for entry. Inside the iron bars, the prisoner looks up, his face battered and bloodied, while the silver-haired noble watches with a cold, detached curiosity. Stepping into the dim light of the cell, she offers a polite but firm greeting, her presence a stark contrast to the grim surroundings. The man on the floor can only stare in disbelief as the woman he knows arrives in such a desolate place. His eyes widen in shock, the realization of her presence finally sinking in through the haze of his pain. She speaks with a quiet authority, declaring that she has come to reclaim what belongs to her, her gaze fixed intently on his battered form. The noble acknowledges her arrival with a formal tone, noting that such a place is hardly suitable for a lady of her standing. Despite his words, she remains undeterred, her expression hardening as she prepares to challenge the fate he has decreed for the prisoner. Ignoring the noble's subtle dismissal, she moves closer to the man on the floor, who asks in a raspy voice why she would come to such a place for him. She answers simply that the matter is settled, her resolve as unbreakable as the chains that bind him. Reaching out a hand toward him, she tells him firmly that she is taking him home, offering a lifeline in the darkness of his despair. He reaches back, his blood-stained hand grasping hers in a silent pact of trust and survival. As they prepare to leave the confines of the cell, the noble calls out to her once more, his voice a lingering shadow in the hallway. The tension remains thick, the confrontation far from over despite her bold intervention.